We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome. This is Are You Checking the Box or Creating Effective Compliance Training? And so if that's not where you want it to be, you might want to get up now and leave the room. We're hoping you stay. And we're going to introduce ourselves, and we're going to start with Julie.
Julie Mason with Medicare Compliance Solutions. And I'm Shelley Siegel with Medicare Compliance Solutions, and we partner with UL in creating their Medicare Advantage content for their trainings.
And I'm Leah Yoder. I am an independent consultant, and I'm representing UL here today. I've worked with them extensively on developing compliance training, and I work with Shelley and Julie. And we're hoping that you enjoy what we do today. Know that we don't do all the talking. We love to have interactive sessions, so we are going to be asking you questions and asking you to participate. And just to get started, I'm going to show you a little video. So that's my little introduction about saying no to status quo. What we're going to talk about today is about how to go from checking the box with your compliance training to actually creating effective compliance training. We're going to talk about why it's important, what it takes to do that, and how you can do it even if you're a small 1 or 2 person training team like many of your colleagues have and are in your industry. The reason it's important is that without effective compliance training, you're gambling that your training is producing the results that you need for your organization, for your people, for you, and for the lives of your members. So to begin with, we're going to talk about why it's important that you have effective compliance training. And what I like to show is evidence. I'm a nurse. Oh, I didn't tell you my background. Let me go into my background a little bit. I have a doctorate in education, and my doctoral thesis was optimizing training transfer to the job, to job behavior. And so that's what I talk about everywhere I go. I talk about how to use training and L&D to really get profit, productivity, and performance from your employees. I'm also a nurse. I've worked in nursing education for years, and with UL I worked in life science education, and then with Julie and Shelley I've been doing Medicare compliance. So I have a vast experience with the regulations and training. Okay?
So I have a quick question. How many health plans are out in the audience? How many are you from plans? And then how many of you that are from plans have a training department?
A few. Okay. Okay.
And I just want to say thank you for bringing everybody popcorn for our movie.
I don't know if they'll feed everyone.
So how many of you, by raising your hands, how many of you are a 1 or 2 person training department at your organization? Okay, so there are a few. Okay. So this information is going to help you too. It's going to help everybody that's involved in training for compliance. Okay. So to begin with, companies spend over $164 billion a year, that's billion, on training without changing the transfer gap. And what I mean by that is that there's a gap between training and using that training on the job, and that $164 billion a year isn't helping. So I like to use one of Dr. Phil's expressions is, so how's that working for you? You know, you've been doing training a certain way for years, we all have, but it's not working. It's not changing the status quo of training. So 10 to 50% of the training that's conducted doesn't change behavior at all. 10 to 50%, okay? 80% of that training is forgotten within a month, and 90% is forgotten within a year. And 50% of every dollar that's spent on training, so that would be $82 billion a year, is wasted because it has not done what the purpose of the training was. I'll give you my philosophy about training. The purpose of training is to change the behavior of the employee to the expected results so that they're doing the task, whatever it is, the way your company expects them to do it. Okay? And so what evidence is showing us is that isn't happening. So you might as well take that training, at least half of it, and throw it on this trash heap because it's learning scrap. That's the terminology that's used about the training that doesn't work. Okay. So let's look at, so that's what it's costing you, lots and lots of money. So now let's look at another reason it's important, and that's because of CMS expectations. They look very closely at your organizations to see what you're doing with training, how efficient you are, how effective you are. Their guidance is very broad. I've read your regulations. But their expectations are very specific. So let's look at that. We're going to skip down to the second bullet. As sponsors, you must ensure that your employees are aware of the requirements that have to do with their job roles or job functions. And even in audit protocols, they ask, did the sponsors ensure that everybody that's involved, like the employees, the senior administrators, your boards, all of those people are aware that the requirements related to job function, compliance, and fraud, waste, and abuse are that those people are made aware of those requirements. But then we come back to that first bullet, and it's, what's the regulation number, do you remember?
Well, in Chapter 9 and 21,
yes.
It basically has the guidance about effectiveness training.
And what it says, when I read it, because I'm coming from nursing profession where we've had to, follow all the regulations, but when I look at this particular statement from CMS, it says that the effectiveness of your training will be apparent through the sponsor's compliance with all Medicare program requirements. Now let's be honest. By a show of hands, how many of you have never had a finding? Nobody. Did I get anybody's hand up? Wave it real high if you put your hand up. I don't see any hands. Right. So we're not meeting bullet 1. Could it be because, let's look at the wording in the other 2 bullets. Ensure means that you're making certain that people are aware, all those people listed. But awareness is not doing it. So you're checking the box. You've made them aware that this is what is expected from the training you've given them, but you're not following through to see if they're actually doing it. And so those statements, you're not going to get no findings if you're just making people aware. You have to really focus on your training and make it more effective, and that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to give you some great ideas on how to make your training more effective.
Just a note, starting in 2010, when CMS started the new regulations and the audit protocol, who has a kind of an example of how CMS tested if employees understood the compliance requirements? What did CMS do in 2010? I'm sorry?
Interviews. They got people in and question.
They asked, yes, very good. They interviewed staff to see what they know. And a lot of times, there were, at the very beginning, 25 to 28 people on site to do the audit. That's how they started, if you were lucky to get one of those. And they simply walked around and asked one question. Who is your compliance officer? And a lot of people didn't even know who the compliance officer was, so they simply kept walking around and didn't go further with any questions. And then as that word went around, CMS started doing the audit, and they'd walk in and there'd be a life-size poster. Our compliance officer is, so everybody who walked into the office understood exactly who it was. We also saw mouse pads. Every desk had a mouse pad saying, your compliance officer is. CMS stopped asking the question.
So and they switched to a different question, I'm sure. Okay. So we want to talk, the third reason it matters is because it affects the lives of your members. And Julie is going to share a story with us now of a member.
Sure. So the reason I'm doing this is we all know that CMS requires training, and often it really is just a check in the box. They require it, maybe our HR department requires it, so we have to do training, let's do it. The thing is, training actually affects, I'll narrow this down to the Medicare Advantage population, it affects people's lives, and it's really easy to lose track of that. When you're doing it because your compliance officer says you have to, or and they're doing it because CMS says you have to. A couple months ago, we did this presentation at another conference, and they asked me to come up with several examples. In this case, I'm only going to give you one, but in that exercise of thinking of how incorrect, inaccurate, incomplete training could impact Medicare Advantage members, I thought of maybe 12 different examples, completely different requirements from CMS, and for every single one of them, I could think of a scenario where if you traced it down, 6, 7, 8 steps down the line, the fact that that health plan employee was not appropriately trained on whatever it was, whether it was related to member services and answering calls for members or processing claims or processing an appeal, that it could have a direct impact on the member. And so that's why we want to share an example with you to sort of bring this all home. Why do we do this? We do this for the members, and sometimes we lose track of that. So the one example I'll share with you is it's related to an insurance broker. We have John, who has recently expanded his practice into offering enrollments into Medicare Advantage plans. And so he has gotten general Part C and Part D training on the basics, and he's also been trained on the individual plan benefits for the MA plans that he's representing. But he does not get very good, clear training on some of the intricacies of the Part D benefit, including the coverage gap. And for someone who's never dealt with Part D before, whether it's a Medicare beneficiary or a sales agent, that can be fairly complex. So he comes away without solid training, without a solid understanding of that. And therefore, when he's out giving his sales presentations, he is not conveying how that part of the benefit works, how the coverage gap works, clearly to his potential members or potential enrollees. So along comes Mrs. Albright. She is, like many seniors, has a limited income. She also takes a plethora of prescription drugs. So to her, the prescription drug benefit of any given Medicare Advantage plan is a really important consideration in her enrollment decision. She sits through John's presentation, and based on how he explains the drug benefits of a particular plan and how it works, prior to the coverage gap and during the coverage gap and during the catastrophic period, she feels with her usage of drugs, that's going to be a good benefit. So she enrolls in that plan. All is good before she hits the coverage gap. She's receiving her drugs at the copay she's expected to, but then she hits the coverage gap. And all of a sudden, she has costs that she didn't anticipate because John did not appropriately explain how that particular plan's coverage during the coverage gap or the donut hole worked. So it's the middle of the year, she can't disenroll, she's stuck in the plan, she has a limited income, she can't afford all the co-payments for the various drugs during the coverage gap, and so she has to decide to let some of them go. She just can't take all the drugs. So she cuts back on some of them, continues with others, but as can be expected, her health declines because there's a reason she's taking all those medications. So that's something, you know, when I think often when a health plan realizes that we have a sales rep who, you know, maybe had a secret shopper experience and didn't score very well, we need to retrain them, okay, you know, we'll have to arrange that. It's thought of at that high level, but that has direct impact on the members. And that's really what CMS cares about. They don't care about checking the box. They want to make sure, using our example, that the sales rep is fully trained so that Mrs. Albright, you know, down the road doesn't end up having to make a decision between food and drugs or between drug A and drug B because she can't afford them.
Thank you, Julie. So just to review, the 3 reasons that we are talking about and why this is important is that it's costing you a lot of money and a lot of resources doing training the way you're doing it now. You may not be meeting the expectations of CMS, and you could be affecting the lives of your members in a negative way. So the second topic is, what does it take to create effective training? So the 3 things that I'm going to talk about that it takes is thinking differently, beginning with the end, and tracking data. So thinking differently is about, I mentioned how our status quo thinking isn't working. And so we are asking you to start thinking differently about L&D. Instead, or training, I call it L&D. So training shouldn't be thought of as a cost center. It's really a center that determines your profit, productivity, and performance of your organization. Because without effective training, you don't get the behaviors you need from your employees. And that's a pivot in thinking for a lot of people. And in that pivot, I'm also going to say you need to begin to think from the end. Just like Stephen Covey says, begin with the end in mind. And we're going to talk about tracking data in just a minute. But you all have data that you keep. We've talked about it at other presentations with audiences. And so what we need to explore is, are you using that data to measure your training? And what I mean is that if you have a result, you start with the result you want, and you work backward in developing your training. If this is what you want, what action does it take on your employee's part to get that result? And that's what the training should be. And it may be 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 actions that have to happen to get that result, but that's what you map out. You begin with the result or begin with the end in mind and develop your training from there. The third thing is tracking data. And Shelley is going to talk about the CMS compliance standards. So I know there are a lot of things that you track. I've learned them from Shelley and Julie. Things like, are your agents handling, identifying grievances? Are they identifying the appeals correctly? Are they coding things correctly? And so Shelley's going to talk a little, we're going to do another activity that includes you and your participation.
So now that the cheesecake is setting in and everybody's going into that carb flow or overfill, we're going to get you to do some interaction and call on you for some information. We're talking about effective training. And it's great perspective because CMS doesn't say an effective training is A, B, C. They look at the outcomes. They look at claims timeliness. Are all claims paid within 30 days? And if not, is that on the dashboard? And that goes to the board What kind of training has it if it's at 60%? What, does any training happen? So my question to everyone, if you can work with the person to the right, and there might be 5 seats in front of you, or a person in front of you, we would like you to discuss together what training have you either led or participated in that you thought it was the most effective training, and answer the questions of who led the training, what kind of training, where was the training, why was the training done, how was it done. We want to hear from everyone. We always say 100 heads are better than 2. What made it an effective training? So if you basically take about a minute or 2 to discuss, and then we'll ask questions of what made those trainings the most effective. So we'll start the clock now, find a partner, and work off some of that energy from the cheesecake.
Okay. It sounds like you've had a lot of effective training. We're going to find out. Regroup. I'll tell you who that voice is in just a minute. Sounds like a radio voice coming to you. That deep voice that sounds like a radio personality, stand up Richard, is Richard Robbins. He's our UL sales director, and we work with him when we come to the conferences. And I always tell him he should be in radio because he has that deep melodious voice.
Maybe someday.
Yeah. So he's going to be the microphone runner for us. And so now there was a lot of discussion going on. So who's willing to share with the group? Raise your hand, and Richard's going to come find you.
Yeah, we wanted to pass the mic because in other sessions we couldn't really hear what people said, so thank you for taking the mic.
No problem. So one of the things that we do, because we're a vendor, well, I'm actually retired now, but my previous company, we were a vendor for multiple health plans, about 50. So a lot of the larger ones, we did the Medicare CMS. And each one of those health plans wanted to add additional slides to that. And so one of the things that I did was said, we're not going to do individual training. We'll compile those slides and add them to the CMS training if they're different. But one of the things that I noticed that the staff, they got in the habit of just clicking past everything, just getting through and then signing the attestation, being done. So
checking the box.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the things that I did was I tried to figure out a way that would be more entertaining for staff to look at these really boring trainings. And so we made them interactive, and we set up a set like the Jimmy Fallon Tonight Show kind of thing, and we did an interview. I had one of the people in marketing set up like an interview and questions, and he would question me as far as what the different things in the training, and I would answer the questions with what the training was about. And it was really well received by all of our staff. They really liked it because it really took that burden of reading those slides and clicking past and made it more enjoyable to watch and learn.
Yeah, great. That's almost like gamification, using gamification to do that. So who else? Who else is willing to share? There's a hand over here, Richard. Raise your hand high so Richard can see it.
Mine was very simple. When I started a new job, I had one-on-one training, and the person who trained me was really good at putting herself in my shoes and was great at telling me why. So she would tell me the steps that we needed to take, but in order for me to really be able to remember and to do it well, I had to know why. And she was also good at, she would tell me why, and sometimes it takes a while for it to sink in, and so she was able to tell if I really understood the why, and then she would help me. So it was a lot of patience, but I think really being able to put yourself in the learner's shoes and telling the why is really important.
As Simon Sinek says, why? Start with why. If you help people understand why, they're more apt to do what you want them to do. Anybody else want to share one more? Let's try that one back
Your
there.
hand up all the way.
He sees it. Thank you, Richard.
When we did our call center training, which that's a hard audience anyway. When we did the call center training, one of the things we did toward the end was the compliance staff did a role play, where someone was the member and someone was the call center rep, and went through, the steps as to what they needed to do to identify an appeal or agreements, and then what their next steps were, those types of things. And the call center did get a kick out of that, just because it made us more approachable to them. So in that sense, it was good. I think they just learned something just because of that.
Yeah. Yeah, great. So those are great examples of thinking out of the box for training and not just read and sign SOPs, as people tend to do, as training departments tend to do. But Shelley's going to ask you a question about that, aren't you? About the data.
So the question is then, with doing that training or setting up a different kind of creative training so it's interactive, what kind of data is collected from that training to make it effective? How do you determine that the training was effective and what data is reviewed? Because it is all about data, and there's a lot collected in all different ways. So can somebody share what kind of data is collected and how that is used? We have somebody over here.
Raise your hand high. Yep, there's
As
you.
we all know, it's all in the data. We talk about data mining, but a lot of times in training, it's not used.
Well, what we did is, because ours was interactive, it also had, it did have some slides in it, and in between, instead of having quizzes at the end, we did quizzes throughout the training, so that you had to look at that quiz. You couldn't just scroll through everything. So you had to look at the quiz, and then of course we graded those quizzes, and then you determined how many people have to go based off that percentage.
So with that,
There were quizzes amongst all of the different slides and all of the different interactions.
okay, so did you compare that data from those quizzes with past data?
Yes, we did, but one of the things that we had is people, if you did not pass in previous years, well, and this year too, you had to continue to retake it until you could get a score of passing. So it wasn't a matter. But what we noticed was that there were less retakes as we introduced this training method.
So more first-time passes.
First-time passes,
Okay,
yes.
all right, good. How about the other examples? Was there any data collected? Over here, Richard. We're getting your exercise today.
Get your steps in.
Well, when we were talking about the situation, one of the things I mentioned was what we saw after that training was an improvement. In the way they were identifying grievances. They were missing fewer grievances. They were missing fewer appeals. They were going into the process a little bit quicker.
Great.
So that to us was that affirmation that we finally did something.
Okay, that's great. So, who did the third example? Because we had 3 examples. What was the other one?
I did, but there wasn't really any data.
You didn't have data? Okay. So, do you understand how important that getting that data is? You may do something different and think, wow, this really made a difference because they liked it, but that liking it is equivalent to a level 1 evaluation. If you think about Kirkpatrick's levels of evaluation and what businesses need, there's 1 through 4. And level 1 is like the smiley sheets. Did you like our training? It's good if they like it, but that's not what we're going for. We're not spending $164 billion a year so they'll like the training. We're spending it to change their behavior. And the only way you can know if that occurred is by keeping data and comparing the results with other results, so that you can trend and track to see if your training made a difference and evaluate. And then you use that information to adjust your training. Like, what's your name? Kim? Okay. So let's say Kim did it. She said they really liked it, and they kept data. So she can, if things start to trend downward, she can go back and say, okay, when we did the training this way, we really had an uptick in results, so maybe we need to do it again. If she had done the training and didn't see a difference, then she should use that information to adjust the training. So your training should always be adjusted according to the results you're seeking and whether or not they're meeting those results. So when you have your training attached to data, then you know what training's working and what training's not. And for the most part, training and L&D people aren't keeping that kind of data. That's what makes the difference in checking the box and effective training, one of the things.
Most people are so excited about being able to create the training, getting attendance to the training, seeing happy faces. That's great. We need to go to the next level to actually impact the outcomes.
Tie your training to business outcomes, and your business outcomes are, examples of them are the CMS compliance standards. Okay, so the third topic is how can you do this? How can you make your training more effective? So just like this crewing team, there's a person that makes sure they're effective, and it's that little tiny person at the front of the boat called the coxswain. That person is the only person that's seated to see the finish line. And that person, the coxswain, makes sure that they reach the finish line and that they do it as quickly as they can. In learning and development or training, that coxswain is your learning management system, or the way you organize it. It's the assignment, the right person. So we're talking about getting the right person, getting the right training at the right time. And it starts with the right person. And if you're keeping your system on paper, I implore you to look at a learning management system. It will make it much easier. There's nothing more frustrating to an adult learner than getting a course that's not relevant to their job and has nothing to do with what they're doing. What it does is make them think training doesn't have a clue what they're doing. And so you need to make sure that your assignments are for the right person for their job role. Okay? And the way usually these kind of things are organized is that you have some training, like HIPAA training. Everybody has to take HIPAA training. So that's for the whole organization. And then you may have a second level that's by department. And then you have a third level, and it may be by job role. Depending on the size of your organization, if you have lots of locations, there can be more steps in this organizational chart that's in your assignment system. We're going to do a little activity right now, and I'm going to need some volunteers from the audience. I'm going to come down here.
Yeah, raise your hand. We're going to pick you up.
And it's not going to hurt. It's fun. And I need like 8 people to volunteer.
Come on up. 8.
Come on. 8 people come forward.
It doesn't hurt.
Come on. I'll start tapping people.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Come on. Come on.
Not 3. We need 5 more. Get up.
Come on. Let's get some men. Come on, guys. Don't be afraid.
Come on, guys. Get
Come on. Come on. You can come up. I see you. We made eye contact. Come on up. How many? 1, 2. It's just a fun little exercise, and it's going to teach us something about learning principles.
One guy from the back. They're up here. There we gotta go.
2 more. Come on, 2 more.
Come on.
Oh, yay! All right. So join us, and then I'm going to have each of you tell us your name and what company you work for. And Richard, where are you? Run, Richard, run, just like Forrest Gump. Just find out their names and your companies.
David Berry from Unity Point Health.
Thank you.
Kathleen Murray from the County of Orange Behavioral Health Plan. Lisa Ray from iCircle, New York.
Kim Bradford from, oh gee, a whole bunch of different companies.
All right.
Wait, Toronto Blue Cross Medicine.
Cliff Schmitz, Select Health.
Deb Leitner, Emblem Health. Tara Sears, Uncle Health.
All right, thank you. So what this activity we're going to do, you may recognize it as we begin to do it. What we're going to do is I'm going to start at that end, and I'm going to show them the task. And then they're going to pass it down the line. And when we get down to Julie, who doesn't know the task, she's going to be the last person to do the task. And we're going to compare what she did with what I did. Okay? So I'm the trainer. I've decided that these people need to learn this task because of their job role. Okay? Now, I want you all to turn, put your left side out like this, and stand, yes. And then you guys come up closer. Everybody get pretty close. All right. And so what's going to happen is I'm going to show, what was your name? Tara. Tara? I'm going to show Tara the task. And then after she sees it, she's going to tap the next person on the shoulder. You're going to turn around. She's going to show you the task. You're going to turn back around, tap that person in front of you on the shoulder. Now, there's no talking. This is a visual task, okay? And you only get to see it once, okay? Just like reading and signing an SOP. Wow. Or getting trained on something one time, okay? So, just stand there and wait for it to get to you. Okay. Here's the task, Tara.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, turn and teach it to the next person. Tap her on the shoulder. Shh, don't help.
No sideline backseat training.
It's coming down the line. It'll be to you in just a minute.
A lot of times we give information once and expect some great outcomes.
All right, teach it to the next person.
It's one-way communication at its best.
It's almost to you, Julie. One more person. Okay. All right, your turn. Show us what you got. What did you learn about your task?
I have to say, when I volunteered to be the last person, I didn't realize I'd miss out on all the fun. Okay.
Is that it? All right. So I'm going to show everybody what the task was. You ready? So thank you all very much for participating. We appreciate your participation. So now as they're returning to their seats, what did that show us? Think about your organization and your training and learning principles. What did that show you? One time is not enough. What was yours?
Everybody perceives differently.
Everybody perceives differently. What was coming from over here?
Smaller segments.
Smaller segments.
You really need a subject matter expert to teach what you're trying to instill in them.
You need a subject matter expert to teach what you're trying to teach others.
You need multi-modes. That was just visual.
That was just visual. Great. Yes. What else? Check for understanding. Yeah, as along the way, some people wanted to do it and have the person shake their head, yeah, you did it right. You know. So they wanted confirmation that they understood the task. Anything else? Uh-huh.
Being coordinated helps.
Being coordinated helps. Well, yeah. It was a little dancey-like, I guess. So I did a little Macarena in there, you know. And this was the motorcycle. So let's see. Anything else? What did it teach you about your employees, your learners? Anything else than what you've already described?
Job aids would be useful to refer to. A job aid.
A job aid. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. Great. Uh-huh.
I kind of thought on the two that maybe you should put the important part of your message at the beginning, because it seemed like people remembered maybe the first few steps.
Yes. And that's what this person over here is talking about, smaller chunks. Okay? So all of that is correct. That's what that one little exercise shows. It's called the telephone game, and your kids probably played it, or you may have played it when you were younger. And it's like, you know, how communication gets so distorted by the time it gets to the end. So thank you for participating in that. We're going to watch another video, because what we're going to talk about now is something that will help overcome what you just saw, and that's microlearning. How many of you know what microlearning is? Raise your hands. Nobody. Wow. We've got a virgin audience. That's great. All right. So I'm going to show you this video, and then we'll talk more about what microlearning is. Let's hope the video works.
Everything you wanted to know about microlearning, but were afraid to ask. Microlearning, from the Greek word micro, being small, is all about getting you e-learning in small doses, as tiny bursts of training material that you can comprehend in a short time. Contrast with the hefty tones you would read in school to study itself, or the typical content-heavy e-learning class, which would be classified as macro-learning. Micro-learning is performed in short time bursts, requires little effort from individual sessions. Microlearning involves simple and/or narrow topics. Microlearning is a natural fit for mobile learning, and while the two indeed go well together, there's nothing that says microlearning has to be confined to mobile devices. Real-world examples of microlearning: watching small instructional videos on YouTube. Flashcard learning. This involves applications that present the learner with small cards, flashcards, with related content, such as new foreign language words, parts of the human anatomy, countries, chemical elements, etc., to aid in memorizing them. Solving mini educational quizzes. Receiving small nuggets of information through email, SMS, IM, etc. In other words, word of the day. Microlearning is not just a byproduct of our short attention spans in the internet age, or a subpar e-learning methodology for when you don't have much time. In fact, science backs it up as a credible and effective method of learning. Microlearning will be a permanent fixture in e-learning, as it hits all the sweet spots. It's fun and engaging, by keeping it short and taking advantage of multimedia and gamification. It works. People remember stuff they've been taught through microlearning better. It's casual. You can do it anywhere, and it doesn't demand too much of your time. So here's this video in microlearning form. Microlearning. It's learning in tiny chunks and short bursts of time. Great way to learn it into small. Goes well with mobile. Will only get bigger in the future. Keep fun learning. Train people better.
Okay, so microlearning is small chunks of learning at a time, which goes with the comment over here about breaking things into chunks. It's more lively and engaging. And the reason we talk about microlearning is because we know it's more effective training than what we're doing now. And microlearning is the way the brain learns. That's why it's so important. Our brain, the brain science that's going on now in neuroeducation shows us and tells us, gives us evidence that microlearning is the best way to train people. So, talking about the brain and how it learns, microlearning is in bite-sized pieces. And how that helps learning transfer, remember we're talking about get a training and transfer that behavior to the job, because that's the purpose of training. And the reason it helps is because it's quick. Like that little video you just watched was like a 2-minute video. So you have a 2-minute video and it captures the attention of the brain and holds it. We have very short attention spans now because of technology. It's not 8 seconds like you may have seen some videos on YouTube saying it's 8 seconds. It's more like 10 or 20 seconds maybe. It has to catch the attention of the brain for us to learn. Microlearning is micro-actionable because you focus on one goal. You focus on one action goal with a microlearning training. And it doesn't take people out of the workflow. You know, they can watch a microlearning training, a 1 or 2 minute video, or read a short email, or however you deliver your training, and it doesn't take them completely out of the workflow to go to a long training, a 30-minute training. It's visually engaging, and I'm going to show you some ways that no matter if you're a 1 or 2 person training department or a big training department, some things you can do to add to your current training to make it more engaging. And it's relevant and contextual. Because microlearning is focused on one goal, the person knows that it has to do with their job, and that it's going to teach them something they have to do. This is an example. These are some slides from a current microlearning training that we have at UL that's about appeals and grievances. And you can see that we even have a doodly in it. Who knows what a doodly is? See that little drawing over there? It's an animated video that things are drawn out. So it catches the person's attention and they watch it while it's being drawn. And these are developed by Julie and Shelley as our subject matter experts. So I'm going to talk about how that works. How does microlearning, having short content is the first step. The second step is to practice. And we don't do that enough. You know, years ago they practiced more than they do now. If you think about that crewing team I showed you, do you think they could go to one practice and win a race? No, they can't. So just like our exercise showed, you can't have a training one time and learn it and do it. And the reason is the way our memory works. So a very simple explanation of memory is that when you learn something, it's stored in short-term memory. And then it goes back to long-term memory. And when you practice it, it's pulled back to short-term memory. And then it goes back to long-term memory. When you think about it or practice it again, it's pulled up again. And that just keeps happening every time you practice the learning. And so I show this picture and equate it with clearing a path in the woods. When you practice the learning, you're clearing a neural path. It keeps going over that same track and makes your brain understand that this is important information and I need to have it ready when I need to use it. Boosters. So let me talk a little bit about boosters. So a good way to have practice is to have what experts call boosters. And boosters boost learning. And they're very simple. You can add them to your current training. A booster can be a quiz, which you've already mentioned you use. It can be a scenario, which makes the person think about the training and pull it to short-term memory to hone that pathway. But experts also tell us that there's an optimal time for boosters. And this is where what we're not doing. It's 2 days after a training, 2 months after a training, or 2 weeks, and then 2 months after a training. So you go to a training, You know, we tend to think of them as events, or you take a CBT, a computer-based training, and then you don't see it again. That's where we're missing the follow-up. If you do boosters, which can be, as I said, you could do a two-person or a two-question quiz by email if you don't have anything else. You can do a scenario, send out a scenario and get that, you know, by email if that's all you have. You can talk about it in a staff meeting and have them practice it. 2 weeks, 2 days, 2 weeks, and 2 months are the optimal times. But any time you can reinforce a training that's already happened is going to help hone that pathway and keep that information ready when they need it. Okay? Performance support, which we already had mentioned. I'm going to tell you what performance support is. It can be in the form of a sign, like that safety sign there. It can be a process flow sheet. It can be a short micro-learning video, or it can be as simple as a checklist. Performance support can take the place of training, and it's much cheaper. So think again about that 8-man, that 8 boat it's called, even though there's 9 people in it, because the coxswain doesn't count in the 8. So let's say they're in that crew. They've got one task to win that race, and so they can really focus on that. But your employees, how many trainings do they take, and how much do they have to remember? And there are just times, they suffer from information overwhelm. And so there are times when they just can't remember how to do that task. That's where performance support comes in. You have access to something like this that they can get immediately when they need to do the task. So if you have low results on something that's very important, some of those CMS compliance standards, think about it and say, okay, is there something we can develop visually, like this, that would tell them the steps to that process, so that they don't have to waste time looking it up. It's just there for them. You can have it readily available. So if you have an LMS, you can have it in a resources section where they can just call it up, search for it, and watch it. If you have machines, I don't think you all have machines, but you can even use QR codes that they can look at with their phone. So that's what performance support is. So to have effective training, you have to have the right person at the right time with the right training. Okay? And so the right time has to do with having it right when they need it. So this is a little bonus I added because I wanted to tell those 1- and 2-person training departments and everybody some practical tips that cost little to no money to spice up your training. Did you know that YouTube channels are free? Anybody know that? Okay, some people. You can start a YouTube channel just with your email address, and you can record how-to videos with your iPhone. If there's something and post it to the YouTube channel. If you have an LMS, you can connect it to your LMS, and that will record if somebody went into it to watch it. Okay, it won't record the time usually or anything, but you can have an access link in your LMS. So having a free YouTube channel and using your iPhone or your Android phone to do short little videos is a great way to do performance support or to teach one action goal. There's also free whiteboard software, which is the person scribbling and then the camera follows the animation. You can build infographics of information from free templates. You just have to Google free templates for infographics. You can have contests and correct answers in a hat and then pull out a winner for a prize. Focus training on one action goal. You know, start making your training chunked, like we talked about with microlearning. Show how-to pictures. If you can't do a video, then do something where you're just taking pictures and post them on a piece of paper and send that out. There's free animation software. You can send out emails with questions and scenarios, And in every staff meeting, you should talk about some training that has just occurred. Review the training. Make them pull that information from long-term memory to short-term memory, and that will help them be ready when they need it and be able to use it. So we hope that we have given you some ideas today how to get out of status quo thinking about training so that you are no longer gambling that your training is effective, but you know it's effective because you're going to set up results tied to your training and be able to track them and to evaluate whether or not you're getting the results that you want from your training. And we thank you very much for your participation and your attention and your laughter. We like to have fun with training, and we are free to talk to you if you have questions for us about microlearning and anything else that has to do with learning and development. And thank you very much. We appreciate it.